We have breaking news right now in Donald Trump's criminal hush money case. Just moments ago, Trump's team filing a new motion calling to dismiss it, citing presidential immunity and his victory in the 2024 election. Now, that comes one day after Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg told the court sentencing should be postponed while the appeals process plays out, potentially even postponed until after Trump's second term in office. Judge Juan Merchan would need to approve this proposal. It's all uncharted territory, as this country has never before had a president-elect facing a criminal sentencing. Joining us now, MSNBC contributor and former U.S. Attorney Chuck Rosenberg and MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. Lisa, what more are we learning or reading in this letter?
So we learned yesterday, Anna, that former President Trump's lawyers intended to file a motion to dismiss the entire indictment. That wouldn't just wipe the slate clean with respect to the existing conviction. It would mean that the case essentially wouldn't exist at all. The New York District Attorney's Office telling Judge Merchan yesterday they oppose that and want the conviction to stand. In the letter that they've sent to Judge Merchan this morning, they're putting a little bit more meat on the bones as to why they believe that the case should be dismissed, citing not only the Supreme Court's presidential immunity decision, but also noting that according to Department of Justice policy, a sitting president can't be prosecuted. And for the same reasons that animate that policy, those principles should be extended to a president in transition, that essentially the person needs to attend to those core constitutional functions of preparing himself for the office, and therefore they believe the whole thing should be dismissed. But the most interesting thing to me is the date on which they are proposing to file a motion, and that's December 20th, because according to the DA's office, they would like to even oppose a brief much earlier on December 9th. If former President and future President Trump's lawyers don't file their brief until December 20th, that's setting up a motion to dismiss that's not fully briefed until after the inauguration, when he is not just a president-elect in transition, but he then becomes a sitting president and the issues to be litigated become different. This looks to me like an effort on the Trump lawyers' behalf to kick this can down the road until he is president again, and potentially even move this to a federal court to litigate the question of whether sentencing is appropriate once Trump is once again in the Oval Office, Anna.
Chuck, what is your read on where we are right now in this case?
Yeah, well, Lisa, Anna did a great job summarizing the legal positions. Look, Judge Merchan has two sort of possible paths here. He can treat the jury verdict as he would treat any other jury verdict and proceed to sentencing. But there's a problem. As Lisa articulated, you have a president-elect, soon to be a president again, a sitting president, and there's an incompatibility. The Constitution, I think properly for any president, whether you loathe or love Mr. Trump, for any president, treats him differently, meaning that he ought not be prosecuted or held to account in a criminal court while he is president. Whether or not that extends to a president-elect, that's not been determined. But Judge Merchan has to decide, do we treat Mr. Trump as off limits for some period of time, 4+ years until he's no longer president again? Or do we honor the jury verdict now as it stands in the normal course and proceed to sentencing? I think the district attorney has the right approach here. Again, there are all imperfect choices, Anna, but the least imperfect choice is to defend the jury verdict and to postpone the sentencing until Mr. Trump is no longer president. Then you can do both things. You can respect the constitutional prerogatives of a president and give him the ability to meet the requirements of his job to the extent Mr. Trump can, and you can honor the jury verdict. It'll just be years from now.
So this is a big if, with Trump's team still pushing for dismissal, but Trump's attorneys argue leaving sentencing just hanging over Trump's second term could lead to, quote, extended proceedings that could make Trump, quote, unduly cautious in the discharge of his official duties as president. Chuck, your thoughts on that argument?
Well, it's an argument, but I wouldn't give it much credence, Anna. I mean, defense attorneys make arguments. They do it all the time. Some are thoughtful, some are silly. This one seems to me silly. There'll be nothing hanging over Mr. Trump's head while he is president if the sentence is delayed. The attorneys can file other motions and make other arguments and litigate as they see fit. Mr. Trump will be able to fulfill the duties of his office during his last term, and then he will face the consequences as any other criminal defendant. So, the fact that someone files something doesn't make it meritorious, Anna. I don't see any merit in the notion that something hanging over Mr. Trump's head, a delayed sentencing in this case, would interfere with his duties as president of the United States.
Let's not forget, Trump has tapped two of his defense attorneys in the hush money case, Todd Blanche and Emil Bovey, for senior roles in the Justice Department in his incoming administration. Lisa, if this case does drag out, what impact could that have?
Well, I think it causes a conflict of interest for Todd Blanche and Emil Bovey, because if, for example, Anna, they continue to brief the issue about whether this case should exist into a future Trump presidency. If Todd Blanche and Emil Bovey are then in the Department of Justice, the department itself will have an interest in getting involved in the case on behalf of the executive office of the president. There are interests for the office of the president that are different than the interests that Trump as an individual has. And Emil Bovey and Todd Blanche, having represented the president in his personal capacity, will have that conflict and may have to even recuse themselves from the department's involvement in this case in the future.
Lisa Rubin and Chuck Rosenberg, thank you both very much.
The Republican-led House Ethics Committee declined to release its report into former Congressman Matt Gaetz today. But tonight, we have new reporting on the allegations that Donald Trump's pick for Attorney General paid women for sex while in Congress. An investigative report in the New York Times, which has not been confirmed by NBC News, contains a document apparently from the Justice Department that Gaetz wants to run. The document, quote, established a trail of payments from Gaetz to women, including some who testified that Gaetz hired them for sex. The document itself is heavily redacted, a bit difficult to parse, but you can see the gist of it. It maps out lots of payments that Gaetz and an associate made to women, lots of them, including, the Times says, the two women whose lawyer told NBC News that they testified themselves before the House Ethics Committee that they had had sex with Gaetz in exchange for money. Gaetz denies those allegations. In response, a spokesperson for Donald Trump told the Times in part, this purposeful leaking of classified investigative materials is a sort of politicized DOJ weaponization that Matt Gaetz will end. New York Times notes the document had no classified markings and does not relate to national security. Michael Schmidt is the investigative reporter who broke this story for the New York Times, and he joins me now. Michael, we've known, well, I just want to set the table here. We've known that there was a Senate Ethics Committee investigation, and we've known that there was some sort of DOJ investigation into Gaetz. We've known that there have been allegations of paying for sex, and specifically having sex with a minor. He denies all this. What does your reporting shed light on?
What this basically does is it helps to bolster the credibility in the statements that these two women have made to investigators. As you were pointing out, their lawyer has been on television the past few days saying that these two women had testified to the House Ethics Committee about being paid for sex with Gaetz. And what this document shows, and we have an unredacted version of the document, we redacted it to make it public so people could see what this actually looks like. But what the unredacted version of it shows is thousands of dollars going from Gaetz to these to at least these two women, including a third who has told authorities that she was paid for sex. Now, what this helps us understand is sort of how much money was going back and forth between Gaetz and these women. The lawyer says that the women would usually be paid between $500 to $1,000 or so for one of their encounters with Gaetz, which would sometimes include several days together and partying that went on during that. And so it gives us a larger sense here of how much money was going back and forth. The lawyer said ultimately these two women received a total of $10,000 from Gaetz, one $6,000, another $4,000. Putting all these facts aside, what this helps to show is what was going on inside of the federal investigation. This shows what federal investigators knew, the ability that they had to see into Gaetz' finances, and how they were able to establish that Gates was sending money to these women. And this is important because Gates has denied the allegations. He has said that none of this is true, that he never paid for sex. But this document, this Department of Justice document that was used in the investigation of Gates, shows money going from him to the women.
Yeah, and we should say that Mr. Leopard's the name of that lawyer who has two clients who he says, who your reporting indicates are some of the recipients of this money that's being paid by Gates, and that he says have testified, I think, in multiple venues, if I'm not mistaken, but certainly the Ethics Committee, under oath saying that they were paid for sex with Matt Gates. I believe one of them testified that she saw Matt Gates having sex with a minor, 17-year-old at the time, a woman that she's a friend of. Again, Gates denies all this. It seems that, what Gates's folks and what Trump's folks have been saying is like, well, they didn't charge him. He was, quote, cleared by the DOJ. And clearly they're correct that he was not charged for this, whatever the investigation bore out.
Correct. He was not charged. Others were. The chief accuser of his, a guy named Joel Greenberg, who was a local tax collector in Florida, pled guilty to this charge and cooperated against Gates and talked about how he had seen Gates have sex with a 17-year-old girl. One of the women of the, who was a client of the lawyer, Mr. Leopard, has told congressional investigators that she saw Mr. Gates have sex with a 17-year-old. It is true the department did not charge Gates, but what you're seeing, and if you think through it, it makes sense, is that if Gates's nomination goes forward, he will almost certainly, you'd have to think, be asked at his hearing, at his confirmation hearing, whether he had sex with women for money. And that will put him in a position where he will have to answer the question. He could also take the Fifth Amendment if he really thought that he had criminal exposure there and didn't want to answer it. But whatever he says to that answer will be really interesting, because obviously if he says yes, that means one thing. If he says no, he's contradicting witnesses and other evidence that backs them up. And if he takes the Fifth Amendment, you'll have an attorney general, if he's confirmed, who took the Fifth Amendment during his confirmation hearing.
Yeah, we should note here the obvious point in all this. Obviously, having sex with someone underage when you're a man in his 30s is illegal. Paying for sex is illegal. The Department of Justice is the chief law enforcement organ in the country and in the federal government, and he would be overseeing enforcement of that, not to mention the enforcement of the prohibition on Schedule I drugs, another part of what the Department of Justice does. Michael Schmidt, thank you very much.
Yesterday, Donald Trump named his pick for Secretary of the Department of Education, Linda McMahon. Now, on its face, this appears to be far from Trump's most concerning staffing decision. McMahon served in Trump's first administration as the head of the Small Business Administration. She briefly served on Connecticut's State Board of Education back in 2009. But she is perhaps best known for stunts like this, ones that have gone viral since Trump's announcement, because McMahon co-founded World Wrestling Entertainment, or WWE, and was often in the ring herself for what we'll call skits. Now, nearly all of Trump's staffing announcements so far have been a circus. But if McMahon's ascent to the top of the education department seems particularly unserious, it's because Donald Trump does not take that department seriously. This is the vision for the Department of Education that Trump outlined while running for a second term.
We'll have one person plus a secretary, and all the person has to do is, are you teaching English? Are you teaching arithmetic? What are you doing? Reading, writing, and arithmetic. And are you not teaching woke? Not teaching woke is a very big factor.
One person and a secretary. As a candidate, Trump proposed abolishing the Department of Education, shrinking it down to a husk so that children might be saved from woke indoctrination. As president-elect, Trump is not only doubling down on eliminating the education department, he says he wants to weaponize it against people of color with the goal of abolishing woke.
I will direct the Department of Justice to pursue federal civil rights cases against schools that continue to engage in racial discrimination and schools that persist in explicit, unlawful discrimination under the guise of equity, will not only have their endowments taxed, a portion of the seized funds will then be used as restitution for victims of these illegal and unjust policies.
Aside from the anti-woke agenda, the centerpiece of Trump's education pitch is this.
Sending all education and education work and needs back to the states. We want them to run the education of our children because they'll do a much better job of it. You can't do worse.
For the record, this is what the states are doing with their departments of education right now.
We are excited to announce a new office here in the Oklahoma State Department of Education. That will be the Office of Religious Liberty and Patriotism. For too long in this country, we've seen the radical left attack individuals' religious liberty in our schools. We will not tolerate that in Oklahoma.
That was Oklahoma Superintendent Ryan Walters, who has begun buying Bibles, and specifically Trump-branded Bibles, for use in classrooms, announcing a new Office of Religious Liberties that will, among other things, force students to watch a video of him praying. Meanwhile, over in Texas, education officials advanced a plan this week to incorporate material from the Bible into lesson plans. So that's the conservative agenda. Gut the federal Department of Education, weaponize it against low-income and minority citizens, and leave education decisions to the states that want to blur the line between church and state. Last month, when Donald Trump called education the civil rights issue of our time, he might have been onto something. President-elect Trump has outlined a vision for the future of American education, one that includes eliminating wokeness, slashing funding for schools that oppose his policies, infusing public school curricula with Christianity, and dismantling the Department of Education. Joining me now is Melissa Murray, professor of law at NYU and co-host of the indispensable Strict Scrutiny podcast. Melissa, help me understand if any of this can be stopped in the courts. I mean, first of all, just the whole church and state thing. How easy is it for Trump to reintroduce Christianity into public school curricula, writ large?
Okay, so last week in Louisiana, there was a challenge to a Louisiana law that requires the Ten Commandments to be prominently displayed in public school classrooms. A judge in Louisiana enjoined that law, said it clearly violated extant precedents demanding the separation of church and state. That case is on a fast track to the Supreme Court. It's going to go to the Fifth Circuit. We already know about the Fifth Circuit. The Fifth Circuit is the farm league for the Supreme Court. Right now, we have a number of Fifth Circuit judges auditioning to be the replacement for Justice Alito or Justice Thomas when they decide to step down. And then from there, it will likely go to the Supreme Court. And everyone understands that that challenge to that law is geared to be the vehicle for overruling cases like Engel versus Vitale, the 1960s era case that basically said you can't have school prayer. And so this is all happening. You had the Oklahoma public school superintendent on who's going to have a Bible in every classroom.
A Trump Bible.
A Trump Bible in every classroom. I mean, these are very clearly targeted at challenging the line between church and state and ultimately sending those cases to the courts, to the federal courts, where in his first administration, Donald Trump made sure that it was stocked with movement conservatives. So they're primed and they're ready to undo these precedents. And from there, they'll go to the Supreme Court, where Donald Trump has appointed a third of those justices. And there's a conservative 6-3 supermajority. And we'll see if we get to live in a multi-faith, plural democracy.
Well, yeah. And to say nothing of the fact that this has been on the rights agenda for literally 5 decades,
a long time,
right?
Yeah.
The woke part is the most current expression of their anti-inclusive, anti-civil rights agenda, right? Yeah. And I just wonder, when Trump says, I'm going to slash federal funding for any schools that don't comply with my anti-woke agenda, I assume there can be lawsuits in there. There can be discrimination lawsuits. I mean, this is so against the sort of tide of civil rights that has been part of our nation's history in recent years, but that this Supreme Court has not been particularly interested in upholding.
I almost feel the religion stuff has a better chance of being struck down.
Well, tell me why.
Well, so for years, the right has stoked and basically manipulated the promise of Brown versus education to stand for this principle that what Brown is really about is colorblind education, like race doesn't matter at all, which is why you can strike down affirmative action and say, because Brown mandates it. Brown says you can't think about race at all. And so if you take that frame in mind, obviously, efforts to expand diversity in schools, efforts to provide equity or to bring in viewpoints that historically have gone unventilated. All of those things now seem like they are color conscious, they are race conscious, and therefore they're constitutionally impermissible. We've already seen this with the dismantling of affirmative action. We are going to see even more of it. It's going to go into the corporate sphere. It's definitely going to be something in education, both K through 12 and higher education. This is where this is going. It's an assault on this idea of a plural, multi-ethnic, multi-faith democracy.
Right. And I guess I wonder if you make any difference, you see any difference between like DEI initiatives and the sort of affirmative action aspect of this, that part of inclusion, and the teaching of history and like the words we use around race, racism, and slavery. Like, do you see the court as being maybe more open to the preservation of that kind of learning than necessarily affirmative action, which they're hostile to?
I wish I could say yes about that, but we saw during the affirmative action oral arguments at the court that certain litigants, certain members of the court tried to talk about the fact that this was an issue that was historically contingent. There was a period of time when many of the institutions that affirmative action policies were being challenged at, like Harvard, like the University of North Carolina, did not admit certain groups, including African Americans. And why couldn't that history of exclusion be repaired through race-conscious remedies that were holistic, that considered a wide range of factors, but also included the consideration of race alongside other factors? And, the court wasn't hearing any of it. And instead, a different kind of historical narrative was advanced, one in which Brown versus Board of Education just says, full stop, we don't consider race at all to speak. And that's not really what Brown says, right? Brown is really about subordinating individuals, like the idea, the use of race for the purpose of subordinating, not necessarily the use of race for the purpose of repairing or for remedying past discrimination. Like, they didn't want to hear any of that. It's just no race.
And this is where we're at. I will say education is the dividing line in American politics.
Oh, well, you saw it in this election.
The numbers are upside down. Harris, college-educated voters. Trump, non-college educated voters. This is our fight. This is it. Melissa Murray, thank you for making the time.
Over the past 2 weeks, the women of America have been forced to witness not only an adjudicated sexual abuser be elected president, but then to see him offer some of the highest positions in government to men who have faced accusations of their own. As the New York Times points out, Trump has selected a defense secretary, an attorney general, a secretary of health and human services, and an efficiency czar, all of whom have been accused of variations of sexual misconduct and, like the president-elect, deny them. This has only added to the pain and fear that a lot of women have already been feeling in the aftermath of the election, on top of facing an onslaught of online abuse and harassment, with phrases like, "your body, my choice," and "get back to the kitchen" surging across social media. And with so much still unknown, you probably have a lot of questions about what a second Trump administration will mean for women, what it will mean for access to basic reproductive care, to birth control, IVF, even no-fault divorce, and how to best protect yourselves through all of it. Well, on this show, we want to provide you with the best possible information so that you are prepared to navigate whatever comes your way. And to help us do that, joining me now is Maya Wiley, president of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. My good friend, thank you so much for being here. So let's just go through these in some sort of order. I think the first question a lot of people are asking is, should women right now be, number one, deleting that health app that tracks your periods and stockpiling things like Plan B and even birth control pills and maybe getting an IUD in advance of the Trump administration coming into power?
Well, I think one thing, Joy, that all women should recognize is it depends on what state you're in, first of all. I mean, we have roughly half the states of this country working and expanding protections for things like reproductive health and freedom. And then we have the states that are working very hard, not just to take them away and have taken them away, but also even to consider ways to criminalize. not just reproductive health, but even whether you get to potentially help other people get the reproductive health care they need. So I think it's really important for women to look at where they are and what their laws and protections are and make those choices for themselves. But certainly, to your point, we have so many women and girls, remember, it's also young people, who are in states for which it will matter tremendously if the Trump administration, incoming administration, does what Project 2025 suggests it does, and we have every reason to believe it will, which is use the power of the executive branch to say, we don't care if it's safe, we don't care if it's tested, we don't care what the science says, we don't care that over half of women who have abortions use this medically proven safe pill to help them control their reproductive health and futures. We're going to say it's an obscenity to mail it to other states. And so for women in those places, I think it's incredibly important, and a lot of women already are, figuring out how to get access to it and stockpile it. But I think we also have to remember that for all the women who are in states that do not have this fear, and there are many, we have to consider ways in which we are providing support networks for those women who do.
But what are the risks of, the administration not only enforcing the Comstock Act, which you just described, basically making mifepristone illegal to mail, but also start enforcing things like allowing prosecution state to state. So if you're in Texas and you go to New Mexico to get abortion services, when you return home to Texas, you get prosecuted. What is the risk that women could, even if they live in a blue state that's protecting them, still wind up prosecuted for helping a woman get an abortion?
Yeah, like this is a place, Joy, where we just can't stop fighting, and women aren't, and all our allies are. But here's the thing, you've gone straight to the heart of what's at stake here with weaponizing government against our people and on fundamental rights. Because right now, in the Biden administration, for instance, the Department of Justice said when, we have 2 states that have passed laws that say, oh, well, we're going to call it a crime if you help a minor cross the border to get an abortion without the consent of the parents. Now, they're trying very hard in that instance to try to skirt around the fact that we have a lot of recognition in our case law that you can't criminalize people crossing borders to do something they have a legal right to do. In this case, they're being cute, but the Department of Justice stood up and said, oh, no. We, as the United States government, believe that is wrong and unconstitutional. We're going to get involved. So imagine now you've got whoever Donald Trump ends up with leading the Department of Justice, which will be someone who will be a yes person to anything that Donald Trump wants. And this is where it goes. You can imagine the federal government using its weight and its resources to support the criminalization of people and women. And that is devastating.
There were 2 other quick questions. Number one, what is the risk that Clarence Thomas will follow through on what he said he would like to do, which is to also go after the Supreme Court ruling that made birth control legal? In other words, returning that to the states so that some states could actually have birth control be illegal. And what do you believe is the risk that no-fault divorce will also go away as a legal option for women?
Look, I think what we can expect is all the forces that are trying to impose religious belief on the bodies of women and girls to come hard for our rights. But I think here's the thing. Whether or not we let them is the question. And there's so many of us who are fighting to say, no, you can't, no, you won't. And remember, states matter here, because right now we have a lot of states protecting rights. We need those states to continue not just to aggressively protect women in those states, but we need women who are in those states to be protecting the almost half of women who are Latina, for example, or Black, who are in states that do not. And remember, it's also coming for health care access, cutting Medicaid. This is also about whether you get basic health care. So I just think if they keep going for these fundamental rights, these basic things we've all come to expect, things that some of the people who voted for this incoming administration don't believe is going to happen, we're going to have not just a world of hurt, we're going to have a world of anger, and we're going to act.
Okay, Congressman, we've been keeping our eye on the closed door that the members of the Ethics Committee have been going into. Look, you've been there, part of the Ethics Committee. How do you think they're weighing their decision?
Well, I think what you have to understand about the Ethics Committee is that it's a perfectly even split partisan-wise, 5-5. In order to get anything done, you have to have a vote from the other party. When I served on the committee, we never had anything but a unanimous vote, and we actually dealt with some fairly controversial matters. And I think it's part of the credibility, the stature of the committee that it is so bipartisan and traditionally has been. So I think what you've got here is assuming that all 5 Democrats would agree to release the report, which I think is pretty certain. Then if it's not released, it will be because all 5 Republicans voted against it. And then you've got the kind of partisan perception that damages the committee, damages the institution, and certainly doesn't serve the American public well.
So, look, Congressman, some of what is reportedly in that report is known. The lawyer, for example, for 2 women has said they testified before the committee that Gates paid them for sex. One of them witnessed him, she says, having sex with a minor. But what else might be part of an ethics committee investigation? What kinds of things could they be looking at that we don't know or haven't been made public yet?
Well, I think they could be looking at financial records that might bring out other possible transgressions, things that might even actually indicate illegal conduct. So there's a wide range of things the committee could be looking into. And I think because of the fact that so much of this information, or at least the allegations, have become public, and I rarely agree with Senator Hawley about anything, but I agree that this information is going to be public at some point. Even if they were to release it strictly to the Senate Judiciary Committee, you have to assume that if there's a hearing, that some of that information is going to be public in the hearing. So, again, there's a wide range of things they could look into, and I suspect that you had a DOJ, a Department of Justice investigation into these same matters. They chose not to prosecute, but that doesn't mean that it exonerates Representative Gates. It just means they didn't know that they could make a case. But again, I think because of the information that's already been made public, that it's important that the public understand whether these allegations are unfounded, whether they're verified, because unlike some of the cabinet positions, Secretary of Commerce and Energy and others, this position has a very direct impact on justice that is meted out to American citizens. And this isn't just implementing congressional policy. This person has to make very serious decisions about prosecutions or not prosecutions. And you want to make sure that the person has as much credibility as possible. And I think there have been enough questions raised about Representative Gates that these ought to be discussed in public.
Well, Frank, we did get word earlier today that Democrats who are on the Senate Judiciary Committee have written to the FBI, and they say they want the complete evidentiary file, including all interviews in the closed investigation into Gates's alleged sex trafficking of a minor. Now, we should note that a witness says that Gates didn't know the age of that young woman at the time. And of course, he was never charged. But what would be in that file that the judiciary members are asking for?
Yeah, look, as has been said, it doesn't have to meet the threshold for a criminal prosecution for it to play right into the kinds of concerns Senate Judiciary Committee should have. So, for example, is he subject to blackmail or extortion? Because there's more out there than we are aware of. Does he have, is there evidence of a substance abuse problem? Is he using illegal drugs during these transactions? Has he tried to launder money by writing out a check for a young lady and saying it's for tuition reimbursement when it's really for something else? All of that would be in there. And the very reason we're talking about this, Chris, is because Trump is not submitting his nominees' names to the traditional FBI background investigation, which the agency's been doing since Dwight Eisenhower. So he's trying to do an end around, and that's why we're talking about how do we get to the Ethics Committee report? How do we get to the DOJ investigation? All of that would be not necessary if we simply have an FBI investigation. And by the way, having studied the history of the MOUs and the executive orders in place since Eisenhower, I would assert that President Biden and the Senate Judiciary Committee should demand an FBI background investigation right now.
What do you see as the dangers if there is an end around, for example, and instead of using the traditional methods of investigation, they would use private investigators?
So first, private investigator is loyal to whoever's paying their invoice, right? So there's no incentive or motivation to get to the bottom of it. More importantly, they have no power or authority to do what the FBI would do, to pull DOJ files, right? To get into even grand jury material, to figure out what that ethics report actually says. All of that would be reviewed as part and parcel of an investigation, and the Senate would be informed as to whether we've got a threat and risk that's going to head a major agency.
So I think that there are a number of people who have been reflecting, Tim, what we heard from Senator Lisa Murkowski, who said, look, we know what our responsibility is as the Senate going forward. Let me play that for you.
There needs to be legitimate vetting. When I say legitimate, I mean just thorough vetting that the committees do. This is our job. This is the role of advice and consent, and I think we need to embrace advice and consent with full enthusiasm. We are a separate but equal branch, so let's not cede any of our constitutional authorities.
Is this an opportunity, do you think, Tim? What has been, I think most people would accept, a fairly fast-paced and chaotic time for senators, and particularly Senate Republicans, to send a message, look, American people, you may have some concerns about what you're seeing, but don't worry. We are going to check the information. We are going to do our job. We are going to vet. And we're only going to let qualified people get through. What do you make of this kind of messaging?
Well, I think it's encouraging. That's nice sounding, at least. For me, it's kind of a we'll believe it when I see it effort. Whether the Senate has the backbone to do real advice and consent across all of these nominations. Because let's just be honest here, like Matt Gaetz, if you judge it across multiple different metrics, is maybe not the most unqualified of the various people that have been nominated. I mean, there are a lot of very questionable nominations. The reason why everyone is focused on Matt Gaetz is in part because of this ethics committee investigation, but in part because a lot of his colleagues don't like him on the Hill. The person nominated to run the Defense Department, Pete Hegseth, has allegations against him in his private life that are at least as severe, if not more severe, than the allegations against Matt Gaetz. His resume, if you will, is less. He has less subject matter experience than Matt Gaetz does to lead a department as significant as the Department of Defense, given the fact that he was a weekend talk show host for the last 8 years. And then you could go down the list. Linda McMahon is facing lawsuits and allegations. Matt Whitaker has never had a foreign policy job, was just nominated to be the head of NATO. So if Lisa Murkowski is serious, that means that there's going to be serious investigation and review of all of these members, not just Matt Gaetz. And if that were to happen, that would create a ton of tension with the incoming administration. Whether they have the backbone for that, I don't know, but I sure hope that they do.
So I want to play what former conservative Congressman Trey Gowdy had to say. He said this on Fox News about Gaetz specifically and potential backlash to the pick.
Do not use the justice system as a weapon. And the message for Republicans is don't do it on the other side either with this absurd AG pick that you just made. The justice is different. It is a combination of policy, law, and also morality. You do not use our justice system as a political weapon. Voters rejected it in November, and they're going to reject it if Republicans try to do it also. Some things rise above the den. The justice system is one of those things.
So you've lived inside this system for a long time, Congressman. Do you think that that was the message that voters were sending? Do you think that they're going to follow all of this carefully and will care? And if so, how could any opposition manifest itself?
I think a portion of the citizens will. Unfortunately, I would suspect a majority won't pay much attention to it, and it will fall just like most things do today on your partisan identity. People who are in the MAGA world will support Matt Gaetz no matter what, and the opposition will oppose him no matter what. But my good friend Trey Gowdy, I think, raises the most salient point. Justice Department is different. And Matt Gaetz has serious allegations against him. And I think what you'll see is resistance to Justice Department actions if he's the one who is in that position, because clearly there will be a presumption among the non-MAGA world that he is using the Justice Department as a weapon. He's basically said he intended to do that. And of course, President-elect Trump has said the same thing. So I think we're in very, very dangerous territory here with Matt Gaetz as a potential attorney general.
With us now is California Democratic Congresswoman Nanette Barragan. She's the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. Congresswoman, it's always a pleasure to see you. I thank you so much for your time. What's your reaction to what you just heard, as Stephen Miller says, a whole lot of things are going to be happening at light speed?
Oh, well, thank you for having me, Jose. I think it's causing a lot of fear and confusion in our communities. I think that's not the American way to do this. We know that the Biden-Harris administration is already focused on priorities to deport those that are a national security risk, those that are convicted of serious criminal offenses, and recent border crossers. So this is, a lot of this is unfortunate rhetoric. There has been a focus on convicted serious offenders. But what they're talking about here is they're talking about going after families, doing basically tearing families apart, which we've seen happen under the first Trump administration. Many people live in mixed household statuses. What we also see, I think, under mass deportations is you're going to see further cost for American families going up. If you start deporting the agricultural workforce and the people in the essential jobs that are putting food on the table, grocery costs are only going to go up. These are also people that are providing caregiving services to our loved ones. There's already a worker shortage. So I think there's a lot of negative impacts to the economy, to the human toll it's going to take, to families and tearing them apart. And I think it would be a real catastrophe in also eroding some of the trust that communities have with, law enforcement agencies.
And speaking of the incoming administration, Congressman, you are nearly one of 100 Democratic lawmakers who signed a letter to the House Ethics Committee urging the panel to release its report on former Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz. Why do you want that report released?
Well, you're talking about the top cop of the country. We should know what investigations have been done, what the outcome has been. The allegations are pretty serious here. So to have somebody who's going to serve as a top cop, I think the public deserves to know, should know, and so should the Senate. So I think it's something that is a basic in having a review and a hearing on his candidacy as a top cop of this United States.
And what did you take away from these past elections? What was your, when you see the results of what happened, what's your takeaway from the elections?
Well, first, I think it's that we need to go across the country into all communities. We need to listen to people. We need to do engagement, not just during election season. We also need to make sure that people feel that they're being heard. We heard a lot about high cost and that people felt the economy wasn't working for them. So even if the economy has the lowest unemployment rate, even if you're seeing growth at the stock market, if people are not feeling it in their pocketbooks, then I think that's reflected on what we've seen. So I think there's a lot of work to do. I also want to remind folks that Latinos are not a monolith, and Latinos, Mexican Americans, for example, in Los Angeles are very different than maybe those along the southern border. And we can't take anybody for granted. It's not about turnout. It's about persuasion. So I think there's a lot of work we have to continue to do. And that starts with persuading people why Democrats are fighting for them and how they're fighting for working class and middle class families. Just take a look at the Trump cabinet and those that are coming in. They're billionaires, the wealthy, his friends. They're not folks that are going to look out for working class and middle class families. And as we know, mass deportations are causing fear in the Latino community right now.
You know, Congresswoman, I know your term as chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus is coming to an end. I'm just wondering, when you look back, what are your proudest accomplishments, and what do you think still remains unsolved?
Well, one of the things I did when I first started was to start this initiative called the Congressional Hispanic Caucus on the Road. And that was exactly to do what we need to do more of. And that is go into our communities, meet them where they are, listen and engage and talk to them. And we have to continue to do that. And I think that this election showed that the work that there's still so much work to do on that front. It's about the American people, and it's about communicating with them and about how they feel and making sure that they understand what Congress is doing for them. And frankly, it's been House Democrats that have been delivering to expand access to health care, to bring down cost, and to make sure that there's jobs. So just take a look at the Inflation Reduction Act to protect our air and our water, the infrastructure bill, which is creating thousands of jobs, of course, for our Latino communities in construction and so forth. So I think there's a lot of work we need to continue to do.
Congresswoman Annette Barragan, it is always a pleasure to see you. I thank you so much for being with us today.